Good to be with you, friends at Harcourt Memorial United Church. I'm sorry I wasn't able to be with you on March the 15th, but I'm in beautiful St. John's Church in Stevensville, Ontario, where they're all set up to do high-quality recording. So you'll hear what I would have shared with you last Sunday. So if I was to say that we live in a time of great change, you might reply, well, thanks a lot, Captain Obvious. Tell us something we don't already know. Everybody knows that change is constant and change is all around us. But change is also nothing new. Change is the story of human existence. The world and human society have always been changing. Every age in our history has been an age of change. What perhaps sets our time apart, though, is two things. First of all, the speed of change, and secondly, the type of change. Change is happening faster than ever before, and it's happening faster than we are able to adapt to. It's driven by technology, but the social impacts are far-reaching. You know, it's hard to believe that the first smartphone came out in 2008. That's only 12 years ago. We might forget that, so radically have smartphones changed the ways in which we live, in ways that couldn't have been imagined in 2007. They call it discontinuous change, meaning change that is not connected to what went before. Some kind of changes, you know, are orderly, they're predictable. Retirement, for example. You know that it's a big life change, but you can get ready for it. You can make plans for it. Discontinuous change is different, though. It feels like a break from the past rather than a continuation of the past. Here's a short video that I think nicely captures the difference between the world in which many of us grew up and the world as it is today. Let's watch.
But Holland comes in for a pit stop. Time to refuel and change tires. Lou Moore himself changes the tires. Only 4 crew members, including the driver, are allowed to work on the car. It's a tense time. Holland stays in his seat, anxious to get away. Let's watch. The tires are changed at last. A crewman polishes the windshield as Holland moves away just 67 seconds after he stopped.
Well, I love that. And so often I feel like in the church, we're like the 1950s pit crew, while the surrounding culture is like the Melbourne Grand Prix. And in the midst of this kind of change, we're kind of at a loss of what to do. You know, I look back on the way that I was trained as a minister and the assumptions that I made when I was younger. For example, I was sure that people were always going to need the church for their baptisms, weddings, and funerals, and that would keep them coming back. I couldn't have imagined when I was younger that wedding celebrants and cremations with no funeral service would become the norm. Here's another example. I was always taught when I was younger that if you have a really good children's program, that will bring the families out, because if the kids are happy, the parents will come. And so I followed that in my church. We had somebody hired to deliver a really excellent children's program. But one day my children's ministry person said, I am so frustrated. I got the kids all excited about what we would be doing at Sunday school next week. But when their parents arrived to pick them up, they said, Mommy, we have to come back next week. It's going to be awesome. And then Mom said, oh, I'm sorry, we can't. We're busy for the next 3 Sundays. So all my assumptions about what you need to do to get young families to come to church went out the window. You can try to plan for the future, but then the ground shifts beneath your feet. The road maps don't work anymore. Here's a picture that really illustrates this, that captures this reality. So this is a bridge. I think it was in Nicaragua or Honduras. This bridge was built over a river, but then a big hurricane struck and the river moved. And that's how it feels, We keep trying to build bridges, but the rivers keep moving. And the thing about it is, we cannot really think or plan our way out of this. We can't adjust a little bit over here or tinker a little bit over there and get everything to turn out the way that we want. We are limited in our ability to think our way into the future in the midst of the kind of change that we experience. In this kind of world, sometimes all we can do is observe what is going on and then act, experiment, try things, try to respond to emerging realities with no guarantee that our solutions will work. And how true is that now? I prepared this sermon a couple of weeks ago, and I could not have imagined how different the world is now than it was just a few short weeks ago. We know we need to think in new ways, but we don't even know what those new ways are. And so our thinking needs to emerge out of our acting. This quotation from Millard Fuller, the founder of Habitat for Humanity, says it all. Sometimes it's easier to act ourselves into a new way of thinking than to think ourselves into a new way of acting. It's not really hard to understand this if you think about it. We experience the truth of it every day. So how do you learn to swim? Well, you don't learn to swim by watching a video or listening to a lecture on swimming. You learn to swim by jumping in the water. How do you learn to drive a car? Not by sitting in a classroom, but by getting behind the wheel. One of the best things about having grandchildren, I've got 6 of them now, one of the best things is that you get to experience their growth and development, in a way you couldn't with your own kids because you were so overwhelmed with the responsibility of parenting. I watch my grandchildren learn to think, to reason, to understand the world by doing things. We learn about life as we act, and when we act, our thinking can change. This is something we're not all that good at in the church. We avoid change in the church. We don't care much for risk. We like things to be the way that we're used to. The church that I currently attend is having the big pew debate. Should we replace the pews with chairs? And it's amazing. Some people are saying things like, it won't feel like church anymore, and if you take the pews out, I'm leaving. These are expressions of a deep need for the comfort of familiarity. Change might be swirling all around us, but at least in church, I can count on being able to spend an hour a week sitting in a hard, uncomfortable pew. And that's something that is never going to change. And yet, much as the church resists change, change is in our DNA. Take the story of Peter in the book of Acts, chapter 11. Peter was a good Jew. And what makes you a good Jew is not just what you think or believe, but what you do every day, especially what you eat and who you eat with. One day God told Peter, by means of a bizarre dream, to go to the home of Cornelius. Cornelius was a Roman soldier and a Gentile, or a non-Jew. And it's hard for us to appreciate just how deeply this command to go to Cornelius' house must have rocked Peter's world. All his life, he had been taught that Gentiles were not included in God's covenant with Israel and therefore were considered unclean. You didn't go to their homes, and you certainly did not break bread with them. This was overturning everything that Peter had been taught to believe from his mother's knee. Now, maybe Peter shouldn't have been all that surprised. After all, he knew the scriptures that speak of Israel, the Jews, as being a light to the Gentiles. Peter had Jesus' own example of reaching beyond the narrow circle of good religious folk to eat with tax collectors and sinners, or to heal the child of a Gentile woman. And Peter had his own life-changing experience. He had witnessed Jesus risen from the dead. Peter had also received the power of the Holy Spirit, a mighty wind that blows out the old and blows in the new. But still, there's a world of difference between thinking something up here and acting on it. There's a huge difference between being open to including Gentiles as a nice-sounding theory and going to the house of Cornelius. And it's amazing to me that Peter seems to have spent virtually zero time trying to process or work this out in his head. He just went. With a million questions buzzing around inside of him, Peter knocked on Cornelius' door. He didn't convene a meeting to see what others thought of it. He didn't check the policy manual to see if it could be justified. He just went, and going changed his whole way of thinking. This was a decisive moment for Peter personally, but it was also a decisive moment for the Jesus movement. At that moment, Christian faith changed from being good news for one people to being good news for all people. The good news broke down the dividing wall of hostility between Jew and Gentile, and it opened the gospel to the whole world. So we have Peter as an example and an inspiration for faithful action in rapidly changing times, in times of discontinuous change. Now, I want to be clear about one thing. I'm not suggesting that it's either thinking or acting. I'm not suggesting that thinking and acting are in conflict, or that we should act thoughtlessly or recklessly. But in times of discontinuous change, the way that we think is crucial. In times of discontinuous change, our thinking needs to be guided by one question: why? Why are we doing this? Why are we doing this? Why is what we've been doing for decades no longer working? Why do we need to do this new thing? Why becomes our basic question in times of discontinuous change. When I work with churches, I always begin by asking them, what do they want? What are you hoping to accomplish? And pretty much 100% of the time, folks respond with some version of the following: we want to do something to attract new people, especially young people. Why, I ask, why do you want to attract new people? And they replied, well, because we're all getting older and we're shrinking in numbers and we need help to get everything done. But let's think about this for a moment. Let's in our imaginations, put ourselves in the shoes of those people out there that we might hope to attract to our church. Why should they give up their Sunday morning to come and help us do something that we care about for ourselves? If our only motive is to get help with the things that we care about, then our strategy is bound to fail, because it becomes all about us, not about them. If the people we want to attract were attracted by what we're doing, they would already be here. We're faced not with the need for more upbeat music or better coffee or different service time. We're faced with a massive social shift in the way people gather, the way they spend their time, the way they search for meaning, purpose, and belonging in their lives, the way they express their spirituality. A catchier website is not going to do it. Instead, our question needs to get at the very root of our reason for existing as a church. Why do we have a church? What's the church for? And I believe the answer is the same as it's always been. Why does the church exist? The church exists to share the grace, peace, forgiveness, and transformation that are offered to us in the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus. That's why we're here. So our question has to be, how do we share that message in a world where most people are no longer interested in the church as we know it? There are lots of different ways to do that that are consistent with who you are as a progressive liberal congregation. But that's the test. And if you're not asking that question and you're not doing that, then something is missing. This is a conversation for another day, but even as younger people are deserting our churches, we know that they are coming together in all sorts of ways to find answers to the deep questions of meaning, purpose, and belonging. We in the church, we have deep wells of wisdom, experience, faithfulness that are shaped by the Christian vision of life. Our question should be, how can we share those gifts with people who are searching? That's an entirely different question from how can we get them into our pews on Sunday morning and volunteering in our activities. I need to say a word about why I am speaking with you, why I'm here. Many of you know or have heard about GUM, Guelph United Ministries. That's the name that's been given to the 4 United Churches in Guelph: Harcourt, Three Willows, Trinity, and Dublin Street, plus the ecumenical campus ministry at the university and Chalmers Community Services Center. GUM was organized as a kind of umbrella group several years ago to encourage collaboration and cooperation within the United Church in Guelph. And it was seeded with money that was left to the church from the closure of Norfolk United. Your churches have realized something really important. They've realized that you cannot continue as you are. The time is upon you when you cannot just try to hold on to what you've had, 4 congregations doing more or less the same things, all of you paying full-time ministers and managing increasingly aging buildings. But you also know something else really important. You know that just downsizing, amalgamating, collapsing 4 churches into 1 church is not the answer either. That just leads to faster decline. Somehow you need to come together to pursue a common vision and a common mission. In 2019, GUM hired an outstanding facilitator named Rebecca Southerns, who is from Guelph, to help you find this pathway forward. And they hired me to assist Rebecca. People from the 4 churches came together earlier in 2019 for 4 exciting sessions where we did some really outstanding work together. But translating the vision that emerged out of those gatherings into action has proved challenging. You know, let's face it, just keeping your busy churches going takes so much energy, it seems like there is little left over to explore anything new. And yet doing nothing is riskier than doing something, and so here I am. And how does that happen? In November, GUM approached me to come back and to try to find some ways to move this work along in a practical way. So over the next 6 months or so, we're going to practice acting ourselves into some new ways of thinking. We've had lots of meetings, lots of discussions. We've brainstormed all the ideas. We've produced reams of reports. Now we need to just get busy and do something, to figure out how you can work together to ensure that there's a vibrant United Church presence in the city of Guelph for a long time to come. And I believe that there are 2 parts to this. First of all, it's a matter of improving what you already have. And secondly, it's a matter of planting something new or creating something new. We want to explore, first of all, ways to strengthen your existing congregations in a time of diminishing resources. And you've realized that you will be better positioned to do that if you work together rather than separately. But that's not enough in itself. At the same time, we need to start to support and initiate new or fresh expressions of Christian community, new ways of being the church. And this is pretty much for all of us uncharted territory. To do it requires seeing things in a new way and learning new skills. And it requires a willingness to experiment, to try stuff, to take risks. And that in turn involves a willingness to let go, because whatever the future holds, it is not going to look like what we have today. And finally, to realize that this is not only or mainly for the benefit of those who are here today, but for the benefit of those we hope will come after us. Now, at Harcourt, you have a tremendous advantage. You have already started these conversations. I know that you've, over the last couple of years, you have discerned that there are 3 stories or narratives that are operative in your community. One is a narrative you've called slow death. You know that something is dying, and you need to care for one another as you age and decline in numbers. A second narrative is the narrative of revitalization. To paraphrase Monty Python, we're not dead yet. You want to breathe new life into your church in ways that does not necessarily involve radical change. But the third narrative is radical change, the need to risk doing things in a fundamentally different way that redefine what it means to be the church. There is no roadmap for this journey. There is no instruction manual. There is no program in a box that you can buy. You need to just put one foot in front of the other and, like Peter, go. Let's remember, though, something else. Like Peter, you are not going empty-handed. You have experiences and wisdom to take with you. Like Peter, you have the knowledge that God is journeying with you. You have the experience of the ages that the times when God appears most powerfully active are not the times when religious institutions like churches have been strong and confident. They're the times when those institutions have been weak and confused and struggling and vulnerable. What we may be tempted to see as the failure of the church may in fact be evidence that God is beginning to work in a new way. And like Peter, you have the foundational experience of faith that has always been the church's reason for existing. As we act out of that faith, our hearts and our minds and our perceptions will be changed. We need to act into a new way of thinking. Well, it sounds hard, sounds confusing, perplexing, sounds like a lot of work. Why would we do this? Why would we put ourselves through this? Well, we would do it because we have been entrusted with something infinitely precious that has been passed down to us as a gift from those who have gone before. That is the good news of God's love for all creation in Jesus Christ. And as the church, we are called to do for others what has been done for us, to pass that on to those who will come after us. So, let's get at it. Amen. Thanks be to God.